So yeah, it's like quite an interesting kind of narrative structure, I suppose. And then yeah, it basically just kind of follows the interactions between these characters over a period of time and everything that happens. So yes, I really liked this book. I think to start with, it did take a little bit of time to get into because which is the other Clegane book that I read. And I think clearly she just has a way of creating these really interesting atmospheres of kind of like unease and like things simmering below the surface that she kind of doesn't. She explores like big themes, but without like pushing them in your face too much. So you have these like interesting settings with the atmosphere, and then the characters layered on top of that. And it's more about like what's not said and the things that aren't happening in a way than the actual action that helps deliver these like really thought-provoking small books with big ideas. And I love that this wasn't even called Small Things Like These. It's just such a cute title, and it's actually like something that is said in the book. But yeah, anyway, I am still being really chaotic with my thoughts, but yeah, a really, really, really good book. It deals with a lot of the hardships and the kind of the horrors that were faced by single mothers in Ireland, and the idea of the Magdalene laundries, if you're familiar with that kind of thing, is a very big theme in this book. And I think she is just an author who, like I say, has a way of capturing a feeling in an environment and putting it into these tightly wrapped, neat packages, in this really concise way. There's nothing spare in this book whatsoever, and can create quite deep, interesting characters from kind of thin air almost, and write some things that get you thinking. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It's interesting that it's like set in the lead up to Christmas, because you could kind of like maybe read this every year, kind of in that period, but it's almost like jarring, the kind of the subject matter and the atmosphere is so not Christmassy, and yet there are like Christmas type things happening, like the turning on of the town lights and the wife making Christmas cake and things like that. So buying presents and things. So it's like a really interesting juxtaposition. Talking about the wife, I really loved the relationship between Bill and his wife and his daughters, and just so interesting, because again, you don't get to see first two books, but they are not. It's not from their perspective. Whereas this and the next book, which I'm currently reading, it is from their perspective. So I didn't like this book quite as much as the first two, which I loved. Partly because I just prefer the relationship, the tension in the first two books. I really loved that plot line in terms of the romance, and I thought it was like a really fun, a kind of fun, intriguing kind of enemies to lovers vibe. And this is enemies to lovers as well. And it, you know, in theory, it should be as good, but I think I just don't like the main male character quite as much as Aaron, who is in the first two books. So I just didn't connect to it quite as much. But it's still really good. And then the other thing I think slightly let this down is that it's not really new material, in the sense of a lot of the stuff, pretty much the whole book actually, is stuff that is happening concurrently to the first and second books, and a lot of it we know what happens, and we kind of see elements of it play out already, and so we kind of know exactly what's gonna happen. It's just that it's rewritten from these characters' perspectives, which just there wasn't quite the same tension, and they kind of drive to keep reading and being on the edge of your seat, not knowing what's going to happen. So I still enjoyed it, and I'm still enjoying reading the series. I'm excited after I do finish The Bridge Kingdom, which I think is just 4 books. I will definitely be checking out some of her other work, because I do like how it's written. I like the characters, I like the setting. I think the settings are actually one of her strongest points, in the world building. And the politics, like I said, I think she does that well. So overall very good, but I think this is probably a 3 or a 3.5 stars, rather than like the 4.5, edging on 5 that the first two were. Okay, on to our fourth book. And if you're someone who likes to keep their books nice and neat when you read them, this is going to be really hard to watch, because I have to say I accidentally drenched this book, and it does not look good. It is very crinkly, which maybe sounds kind of nice. There's a bookmark in here. Yeah, this is a lesson not to carry books in backpacks when hiking, and you get drenched to the bone and you don't have a waterproof backpack. Anyway, the book is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And this is quite a famous book. I think it was written in like the 50s or 60s. I was slightly disappointed by this. I think my expectations on this book were way too high, because it is quite a well-renowned book. And again, someone had kind of mentioned it to me, and suggested I read it, so I'm going to read the back for this one. Okonkwo is the greatest wrestler and warrior alive, and his fame spreads throughout West Africa like a bush fire in the Harmattan. But when he accidentally kills a clansman, things begin to fall apart. Then Okonkwo returns from exile to find missionaries and colonial governors have arrived in the village. With his world thrown radically off balance, he can only hurtle tragedy. I would say that gives quite a lot away to start with, so kind of, I guess, apologies for that. It's one of those blurbs that kind of does tell you so much about the plot, and I think maybe that's kind of one of the things that I think let it down for me. Like the main thing I think I would say actually is the kind of the plotting and the pacing of what happens in the book, because obviously from this you're like, okay, so this major event where the main character kills one of the clansmen and gets sent into exile, and then he comes back and there are missionaries and things are completely changing, and it's like how he deals with that. But that all ends up happening, I think, like, and again, I'm sorry, like, sort of semi-spoilering, like, in terms of when things happen, but I swear, like, that all happens in the last, like, not even third, maybe, like, quarter of the book. So, I think, having read the back, and then knowing that, I was like, when is stuff gonna start happening? And there was, like, so much build-up, and, like, smaller plot points, like mini stories within the book to start with. One of them around this boy that gets taken as a kind of, not a tribute, but like kind of an apology, I guess, from a different clan after there was some like someone was hurt or killed. So anyway, there's like this whole story with him that takes like a few chapters or whatever, but then that doesn't, like, it kind of feeds into your understanding of the characters and I guess the customs and the society, but you know, it doesn't really have anything to do with the main plot, other than character building. But yeah, it felt weird to me, like, that all the stuff like just happens right at the end. Yeah, that kind of just threw me a little bit, and I felt like I was constantly waiting for that stuff to happen. And then the other thing that I guess was quite difficult to read was, you know, obviously you're reading about a different culture with different customs, and you know, that's not always the most palatable stuff in terms of, yeah, like treatment of women and sacrifice, like, not even sacrifices, but like the kind of, some of the brutality around like killings and the attitude to the kind of inferior or like different members of the clan and stuff. So yeah, there were definitely things that were hard to read. And the main character, who I apologise if I was pronouncing that completely wrong, which I probably was. Yeah, so he's just like not a sympathetic character, because it is hard to like see his opinions on his wives and his treatment of people and stuff. He's like not that nice. So you are definitely in a situation where you're like not necessarily rooting for him to start with. But maybe that's the whole point of it, in the sense of like, you know, just because you don't see someone else's society or like their kind of customs, you don't see them and identify with them, doesn't mean that you know, that their whole way of life should be changed or whatever. So yeah, I don't know, I guess it's complicated. Maybe that's the point of the book. It's probably one of the novels that would really benefit from reading more around kind of the author's intentions, the author's life, kind of critical responses to it, and taking it in a more like study, like literature way. You're probably going to get a lot more from it, maybe, than just reading it in isolation, or maybe reading it again. I think I don't do that often enough, actually. Like, loads of books, like, I think small things like these, as well. I've heard people say, like, they benefit from a reread, and you get loads more out of them on a second time through. So So this book is crazy, but I loved it. Yeah, so another really short book. Partly why I chose this was because I think I had like 2 or 3 days left in the month, and I was like, I'm gonna try and fit another book in, and I picked this up not long ago. Like I said, I had to show it in a book haul recently, and I think I just had a really good vibe about it. I think I knew that I was going to enjoy it, and obviously with it being super short, I was like, yeah, let's pick that up. So, yeah, this is the story of a scientist, professor, doctor guy called I can't remember his name. Anyway, the main human character. Actually, I'll start at the beginning. It starts off being narrated by the dog itself, who is a stray dog, and you meet him when he's just been hurt by a cook, like throwing some boiling water on him, which is horrible. There's a lot of like gory descriptions in this book at times, like quite, if you're like a bit squeamish in terms of like body medical stuff, yeah, you're gonna have fun with this. They're not too bad, but yeah, just a little warning on that. Anyway, yeah, so you start off in the dog's eyes, which is really fun. I do quite enjoy it in books when you see through the perspective of an animal or something that's not human, like an inanimate object even. So yeah, it's kind of fun. Anyway, this dog gets picked up by the doctor, scientist person, and taken in, and he helps the dog heal, and then he ends up doing a weird like experiment, because the doctor is a specialist in kind of hormonal treatments and rejuvenation of the human body. I think in particular like reproductive and sex organs. So this dog is going to be used as kind of an experiment, and the doctor operates on the dog, and he transplants the testicles and the pituitary gland of a recently deceased human man into the dog, and then the dog somehow survives the surgery and wakes up, and then basically like mayhem afterwards. I'm not gonna really go into what happens afterwards, but it is absolutely hilarious at times, like what the dog ends up becoming, like how he behaves after the surgery. Just some really, really fantastic moments of like kind of comedy genius, basically. And I kind of got the sense of the character of the dog really well. I think came across really strongly. But yeah, it definitely was giving Frankenstein vibes. Obviously, in particular with the idea of kind of your creations and your experiments kind of backfiring a little bit, and the kind of chaos and difficulties that can happen when you try and play God. Although this is a much less intense kind of telling of that story. Obviously Frankenstein is quite dark, so this is a much kind of lighter way of dealing with it. I mean, ultimately when you think about it, it's definitely, essentially tortured this animal, in the sense of like experimenting on it, but so it's not light in that sense, but the kind of telling of the story and the master and